The courtship of First Congregational Church and Second Presbyterian Church was like any marriage, fraught with unexpected twists and turns, fits and starts, second thoughts, and excitement. Looking back upon that time, it's what could be expected when liberal Congregationalists with a strong bent for abolition and mission met with more conservative, stoic, frugal Scotch Presbyterians. When the Cathedral of the Midwest, home of First Congregational Church, was consumed by fire on March 21, 1936, they were in need of a new home. For a number of years, the membership and financial conditions of First Congregational and Second Presbyterian Church had been in decline to the point that each congregation struggled to have the resources needed for a vital congregation. During the summer and fall of 1936, individual members of these two downtown churches began to talk about a more cooperative ministry. These conversations reached a climax when two prominent women from each church broached the subject of a possible merger. Discussions culminated in the first proposal for federation between them on March 29, 1937. Later that spring, the congregations met for their first joint worship service in what is now the Cornerstone building. Over the succeeding months, a committee of 14 worked on articles of federation that would define every aspect of this union. Early on, the Congregationalists and Presbyterians sought to maintain their connections with their respective national bodies. The Congregationalists were known as a liberal church because of their support of leading abolitionists and members. The Presbyterians did not object to a liberal spirit that was welcoming to all people who wished to work together as followers of Jesus Christ, but could not support a church lacking in doctrinal standards and absent of the theological positions of either the Presbyterian Church or the positions of being an evangelical Protestant Christian church. At a special meeting on October 27th, Second Presbyterian Church reaffirmed its desire and willingness to join in a federation with First Congregational Church with a few caveats. The two would continue to worship at Second Presbyterian Church until such a time that the facilities proved to be inadequate and the federated congregation became strong enough financially and numerically to build a new church. They also added that current facilities would have to be sold and that a suitable date, building plan, and financial arrangement would have to be developed to avoid a heavy debt. A final draft of a federation agreement was delivered to Clarence Schroeder of First Congregational Church in October of 1937. On November 4, 1937, First Congregational Church met in Bradley Hall on the campus of Bradley College to consider the final proposal. They voted against it. Then, 11 days later, on Monday, November 15th, 5 members of First Congregational Church met with the session of Second Presbyterian Church and discussed changes in the proposed federation agreement. As a result of that meeting, a joint congregational meeting was set for 2 days later to be held in Second Presbyterian Church at 7:30 in the evening. The two congregations gathered in the auditorium of Second Presbyterian Church for a vote. Passions ran high as the two churches discussed the federation agreement. Ballots were distributed, prayers were offered. When the ballots were tallied, the results were as follows. On the congregational side, 97 voted in favor of adoption, 36 opposed, and 1 ballot was turned in blank. On the Presbyterian side, the vote was much closer. Only 43 voted in favor of the federation, 32 voted in opposition, and 11 members did not vote, thus abstaining. The vote for federation passed on the Presbyterian side of the aisle by the slimmest of margins, a mere 51%. With the final tallies in, the congregations met again, this time in joint session, and ratified the Articles of Federation. First Federated Church of Peoria was born. Unfortunately, the Reverend Kyle Booth, the pastor of First Congregational Church and a leading figure in the federating of the two churches, was not present with his church on that historic night. He completed this part of life on September 15th, just 2 months prior to this meeting. Shortly before the vote, the Reverend Robert Logan of Second Presbyterian Church submitted his resignation and preached his last sermon in the church on October 24th. His resignation was effective on October 31st, 1937, All Hallows Eve. The next day, the clerk of session, Dan Shaw Anderson, at the former Second Presbyterian Church, wrote to his friend, the Reverend Dr. Adolph Bahn of First Presbyterian Church in Champaign, "To my utter amazement, our congregation voted last night to complete the Federation Agreement, which was entered into last May, and as a result, we emerged from the meeting as the First Federated Church of Peoria. I figured before we counted the ballots that our cause was lost. Needless to say, I'm very happy over the result, but I feel that have a tremendous amount of very careful planning and work ahead of us in order to smooth out some of the rather rough spots that have developed." Patient and painstaking work still had to be done in the months and years ahead. The doctrinal position of First Federated Church is summarized in the Articles of Federation. This federated church shall continue to be an evangelical Christian church and shall maintain the historic positions of the Presbyterian Church USA and the Congregational Church as defined in the official handbooks of those denominations. As the storm clouds of war gathered in Europe and the Asian Pacific, the new church needed a new pastor. After an extensive search fraught with complications, the Reverend Dr. Arthur Frederick Ewart was installed as the congregation's first minister on May 18, 1939. The son of a prominent Methodist Episcopal clergyman, Dr. Ewart was born in Colorado but spent his formative years in Illinois. A graduate of Illinois College, where he received his Bachelor of Philosophy, Bachelor of Arts, Master's, and an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree, he received his Bachelor of Sacred Theology from Boston College. He also did postgraduate work at Princeton and the University of Chicago. A veteran of World War I, he served First Federated Church less than 2 years before being called as a chaplain in the United States Army. The Reverend William Jansen became the church's interim pastor in Dr. Ewart's absence and continued to serve in that role until 1944. His strong leadership during this time of war and transition was invaluable to the new congregation. The Reverend Dr. Leonard Odiorn was installed at First Federated on December 10, 1944. A native of Iowa and son of a rural mail carrier, it fell to Dr. Odiorn to take up the arduous task of leading the congregation from an uneasy alliance to a unified congregation. He came to the church at a time of deep divisions regarding matters of policy in the Federation Agreement and a new church building. When he left in 1950, he left a congregation that was unified with a good spirit and a common purpose. In his farewell letter to the congregation, Dr. Odiorn wrote, "The Odiorns will leave this parish with great regret. One cannot live as close to some of you as we have, or as close to this new building as we did, without having the cords of our heart intertwined with yours and this lovely structure." He went on to say that he accepted his new call for the good of his family, having literally worked morning, noon, and night for the church. It took that kind of labor to make it go, because the difficulty so large and dangerous that occasionally we thought First Federated might go back instead of ahead. As a family, we have put more money and energy into our work than we probably should have, considering other factors. But we're glad we did. It was good for us and the church. The road to a new building had been hard. It had taken its toll. As many as 5 different locations were considered. 2 building committees were formed and dismissed before a third and final building committee was able to work through the details. The church settled on one that had originally been considered by the trustees of First Congregational Church. Located at Florence Avenue and Sheridan Road, the land was secured for $10,000. On July 23, 1941, by a vote of 60 to 6, the congregation voted to purchase the 3 acres. 4 days later, the Peoria Journal-Star ran a story with the headline, "Federated Church to Rise from Cornfield." The next challenge was to settle on an architect. The building committee resigned and a new committee was eventually agreed upon. Meanwhile, the church carried on its ministry at the site of the old Second Presbyterian Church. The basement was renovated and turned into a youth area for the fledgling Tuxis youth group. In the space, the youth not only supported the troops at war through care packages and letters, but enjoyed shuffleboard, ping pong, and pool. The church realized that they could not grow in their location. First Congregational Church had previously commissioned a survey of churches and religious conditions in Peoria, which stated that in 1936, the churches in central Peoria were losing members while those in outlying areas were experiencing growth. The experience of the new church bore out the findings of the survey. A new building committee was formed in 1945. In 1946, they recommended the architect Herbert Amory Brand of Chicago. Brand had been the designer for Arcadia Avenue Presbyterian Church in Peoria. In 1948, the trustees of First Congregational Church deeded the property at Florence and Sheridan to First Federated Church, and ground was broken for the new building on July 11th of that year. On October 17, 1948, the Cornerstone was laid. Articles placed in the Cornerstone included a new Bible, some of Dr. Odiorn's sermons, pictures of the old First Congregational and Second Presbyterian churches, a history and pictures of the city of Peoria, a copy of the October 17th Sunday Journal-Star newspaper, and a brochure of the proposed new church structure. On November 20th, 1949, Dr. Odiorn preached the last sermon in the old Second Presbyterian Church to an overflow gathering of 560 nostalgic members. God builds no church, Dr. Odiorn proclaimed. By His plan, that labor has been left to man. And thus, after 12 years of federation, the Church of Tomorrow was ready for its first worship service 1 week later. 900 worshipers gathered on that November morning in 1949 for the first service in the new church building. They filled every permanent and temporary seat in the building. At least 50 people stood through the service, and 100 or more had to be turned away for lack of space. 2 weeks later, the congregation held an open house to the community. Visitors and members parked in the 70-car gravel parking lot and walked through the modified Gothic-style facility, which included a center quadrangle garth with a pulpit for Vesper services and weddings. The windows had been designed and constructed by the Willett Stained Glass Company of Pennsylvania. In the chapel, 2 memorial windows honoring past ministers of Second Presbyterian Church adorned the north wall. The bell tower contained a small pastor's study with a pastor's office located in a different part of the building. On the second floor, there was an assembly hall and a stage. A wing off of the stage had classrooms and the organ loft. The modern kitchen was next to the sexton's office. At the other end of the assembly hall was a youth lounge and sewing parlor with storage closets for sewing machines, choir robes, and equipment. The building was formally dedicated in January of 1950. Total cost, $541,000. With the war behind us, the United States was in a building mode as millions of GIs made the transition to civilian life. Dreams pent up by the Great Depression and the war began to be lived as the GI Bill allowed veterans the chance for a longed-for education. The interstate highway system began to connect America from coast to coast as never before. Suburbs sprang up in cornfields, and new schools were built. The post-World War II baby boom hit First Federated Church in a big way, as over a 10-year period, their Sunday school attendance swelled from 92 in 1949 to over 300. The congregation was clearly outgrowing its building. A new chapter was about to be written.